panels, but if you are joining us, welcome. This is, I can't remember what title I actually gave this panel, but pretend I do.
It's from 800 words to 80,000, short humor writers becoming authors.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, Jennifer's so on it. Wow. So that's the title of this panel. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. Hope everyone's medium day is going swimmingly. Have you guys done any other panels or anything on medium day so far?
There was a couple I wanted to do, but I have a murderer dog and things had to be taken care of. We had to clean up in the house. Left a present on the bed.
Yeah, I know there's a few other comedy ones. I know Greener Pastures is doing one. If you're also humor people who are in the audience, I think Roz Warren is doing one later this afternoon. She's another humor writer. So check those out if you like humor. Also, I think there's like the chat, the Q&A tab should be open. If anyone has any questions during this panel, feel free to drop them in there, and hopefully we'll have some time to get to questions for our wonderful panelists here. So since it's 1 o'clock, I'll just go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah James. I'm the editor of Slackjaw, which is Medium's largest humor publication. I'm also a historical fiction author, and those two facts about me confuse everyone in my life. So I wanted to do a panel delving into that. I went from writing humor to writing my first historical fiction novel about the Manhattan Project, which was very, very serious of a topic. And I felt a lot of whiplash doing that. But I also did find that humor writing was very helpful to the process of writing a novel in a lot of ways. So I've brought together two other authors who have also written humor and have both contributed to Slackjaw. So I will introduce them now. Lindsay Hammeroff is an editor of the Medium parenting humor publication Frazzled. She has written humor for McSweeney's, The Belladonna, and on Slackjaw. Her debut romance novel, Till There Was You, comes out in 2024 from St. Martin's Press. And Jennifer S. Brown has written humor for Slackjaw and McSweeney's, as well as writing fiction and nonfiction for numerous publications. She is the author of the USA Today bestselling historical fiction novel, Modern Girls. So welcome to both of you. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm so glad that you could join me. I have read both of their books. They are both fantastic. I'm obviously a historical fiction person, but I'm not a romance person. That's not a genre that I normally read. And I devoured Lindsay's novel. It felt like a warm hug of a book. So I highly recommend, at the end of this panel, I will drop a link to a newsletter that I put together for Slackjaw that has links to buy both of their books. I highly recommend both of them. They're absolutely fantastic. So thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I was hoping we could start just by talking a little bit about like your path to writing in general and like how humor writing and novel writing fits into that. So Jennifer, why don't you start us off?
Well, I've been writing for a very, very long time. My undergraduate's in film from NYU, and I thought I was going to write screenplays. And I started writing them, and I kept wanting to put in all this exposition. So I decided I needed to transition to prose. And I did get an MFA in creative writing at the University of Washington. And after that, it's a struggle trying to balance the writing and be making a living, because as you both know, and probably a lot of our viewers know, it's hard to make a living from being a writer. So when I was writing my first novel, Modern Girls, as I mentioned, it's a super secret, but I have another one coming out next year. I found that there's a lot of downtime that I think most people don't know about, right? Because you send it in for, it's on submission, and then it's in edits, and then it's in copy edits, and you have a lot of downtime, and my brain wouldn't focus on another big piece. And so that's when the humor writing came in. And so for me, it's just a little nice levity because my books do tend towards the serious side. And this is just a way to force my mind into another direction, keep it busy. And it's nice because if you have too much downtime and you're not writing, I feel like if you don't use it, you can lose it.
Absolutely. It's like a habit. You have to work on it. Yeah. Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe I saw a tweet from you at one point, or an X from you, about you got inspired to write this book because you wanted to write like a romantic comedy that was actually a comedy. Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
Yes. And it was inspired also by a tweet.
Oh, fantastic.
So I was writing, I also started writing humor during the pandemic, which I feel like everybody did, in an accidental way. And I started submitting it. And then I was on Twitter, and I had started like making a community on Twitter, and a few literary agents were following me. And one of them had tweeted like, I want to see a book that's like a romance, but like really a romantic comedy that's really like heavy on the comedy. And I was like, oh, I could, like, so naively, I was like, I could do that. Sure. And that sort of like set me off because I had started my book and it was just going to be a romance. Like it was just going to be a straight romance. And then around that time, I started reading Red, White, and Royal Blue. And I was like, oh, this is what I want to write. And then I got this tweet from this literary agent and realized that there was really like a market for that. And so I started writing for that reason.
That's really fantastic. That comparison makes a lot of sense to me. If you like Red, White, and Royal Blue, first of all, watch the movie. It's so good. Second of all, definitely pre-order Lindsay's book because it's a very similar vibe. That's really interesting. So you approached, is this story something that you mapped out, not including the comedy elements, or did you have this story in mind knowing it was going to be a comedy?
I did not know it was going to be a comedy. Yeah, I sort of had it like, and I didn't map it out. Every time I write a new book, I'm like, this is going to be the time that I'm going to map it out. But I'm a pantser, which is like the term for when you write and you don't really know what's going to come next. But I had this idea about what I wanted the story to be. And I didn't envision it as a comedy until I saw this tweet and I started reading in the genre. And I was like, oh, actually, I could marry the two skills. Like one could lead to the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how did you kind of like find your comedic voice inside of like, because romance has, of course, like genre conventions that you need to work with. How did you like marry your personal comedic style with those kind of like genre expectations?
I took some humor writing classes. I did the Second City.
Yeah.
And I went down that whole path. And like one of the best pieces of advice that I got when I was doing those things was to just write the book, or in that case, it was like write the humor piece that you want to read. And so that was just kind of, I just sort of wrote exactly the way, sometimes just like the way that I talk was just sort of the way that I wrote. And I didn't try so much to try to fit into a style. But to give it structure, I had seen a recommendation for a book called something about like the beat sheet.
Oh, yeah.
Romancing the Beat.
Gwen Hayes, I think, is the author of that. Yeah, it's a great book.
It's a great book. And so she sort of gives you like within the conventions, here's sort of like the parts of a novel. And so I sort of used that to sort of outline where I was going to go next to sort of fit the genre, how it's the conventions of the genre. But I did sort of use that lesson from writing humor of just write what you want to read.
I think that's so interesting because one thing about humor is that it is so subjective. So I think we're more comfortable when writing humor of being like, I don't care if anyone finds this funny but me. You just have to write the thing that you find funny. But for some reason, people get in their heads when writing like fiction, maybe because it's longer, it's more of an investment of time. You think, oh, I guess I feel like more authors fall into the trap of like thinking about like what's going to sell or what the market wants. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So Jennifer, okay, your book is not funny. You're very serious.
But first one's not funny. My next one actually, it's very serious, and yet I do have a lot of sort of lighter moments in it. And I have to say, Lindsay, I also took the Second City class. I think that's a familiar path for a lot of us who are exploring humor. But, one of the things actually that I really took from humor, my editor on the one I'm working on right now said to me, we need to see more of this person being a bad guy earlier. And my first thought was, I'm going to have him punch down, right? Like I'm going to have him, in comedy, you have this idea of punching up, which is what you're supposed to do. You don't ever want to, Sarah, you can probably explain it better than I can.
Well, I guess the idea is like you want to make fun of the people with power, not the people without power. Yeah.
Right. And I felt like the greatest way to make him evil early on was to have him punch down, have him, really be just nasty to people there. And I also, there's two other things that, humor is tight, right? Humor has to be tight. And that's something I look at when I'm doing my own writing is like, how much tighter can I make this? And I have a lot of sort of banter scenes. And, I really try to chop them down to be, just the element to get that sort of chuckle in there.
Yes, I totally know what you mean. I feel like something that's really helpful about having a background in like the kind of premise driven humor that like Slackjaw or McSweeney's or Frazzle does is when you're writing something like that, you have to have a very clear premise or else the jokes won't come through. And I found as I'm writing books, I almost look at like scenes or chapters as like, what's the premise of this scene? Like, what's the one thing that you need to understand about what's going on in this scene that this scene needs to accomplish? That I think doing humor really teaches you how to find the essence of that and get to it quickly.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think that I have to say, I think that my novel has benefited more from my humor than my humor from my novel. I mean, I feel like it's definitely in that one direction. I don't know how you feel about that, Lindsay. You're not in your head.
We were talking about that before. We're like, we write books now. Like, it's sort of like, it feels more like the humor skills are going more towards the books and you're not really bringing it back towards the humor.
Yeah. But I will say both of you have written humor pieces about like the writing life and like the publishing industry. So even if like the skills are not translating, you're still picking up inspiration from that other side of what you do. And that's actually something I wanted to talk about because like this business is so hard that like humor can just be like an escape, like a release valve for that,
It can. Especially because there's such a faster turnaround too. Like I will sometimes be like, oh, I'm going to get rejected within 4 days. Like that's nice. If you send it to McSweeney's, you're going to get by the end of the week, they're going to let you know if you're in or out. And it's not there's so much like wait time, in writing, and you can write a whole book and then it doesn't sell. And, it's sort of like a release to just produce something and get feedback so much quicker.
And even if it does sell, you're on submission for months. Yes. I mean, unless you're one of the very rare few, right. I mean, it can be feel like a lifelong experience being on submission.
Yeah. Okay. But Jennifer, just to go back to your first book for a second, to Modern Girls for a second, even though there's not a lot of like humor in that book, I still found like your characters have like a humor about them. Like, so this book is about like a mother and a daughter, and the mother character, every time somebody enters or leaves the apartment, she like shout like, don't slam the door. And it doesn't matter like what's going on, like what dramatic thing is happening in their lives. Every single time somebody like leaves the house, don't slam the door. And that was just such like a real moment to me. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think humor can really bring to novels is that just those real moments of detail.
Yes. And you know what? And I thought about in humor, you have the repetitions, if you're going to do a repetition, you have to do it at least 3 times, I believe. And so that's definitely something to think about when you're writing. If you want to make something funny, it's not funny the first time someone yells, don't slam the door. But by like the 4th time, it's like, oh yeah, they're going to slam the door. Yes. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point because, it's like planting and payoff, mm-hmm. it is something that's huge in any kind of writing and screenwriting and book writing. But in humor writing, it's essential because if you don't, the payoff is the whole thing. It's the joke,
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest humor lesson also that I learned is like the specificity. Like when you're revising in humor, they were like, no, it's not funny to say a bobblehead, but it's like funny to say like a Sheldon Cooper bobblehead. To give something very specific makes it funnier. And that's something you do when you're saying like in a humor piece, when every word counts, it has to be so tight. I think using those kind of skills and putting that in a book makes it funnier when you use that kind of like specific, like the repetition. It's just like something that you've learned from that you can apply.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what, if like somebody were, coming to me, some hypothetical person, and saying, Sarah, what is the benefit of like humor for me as just a regular writer? That's like the number one thing that I would say, because I did a lot of improv in my youth, and as one does. And that's something that you learn to really do in improv, is to pay very close attention to every single thing that you do, or that other people are doing, because you want to bring everything back in like new and unique and interesting ways. And I think doing that and like learning those skills really helps you no matter what kind of writing you're doing.
Great.
So Jennifer, I know you've written in like some other genres. You mentioned you've done screenwriting. I know you've done some travel writing as well. Has humor come into those as well?
Definitely. I've written a few short stories, but really I do more creative nonfiction. Mm-hmm. And I definitely try to lean into the funnier parts, especially if it's a more serious topic, right? Because if it's a more serious topic, I feel like you need to give people a breather. And so you can do that by looking at the funnier side of things.
Absolutely.
Like, for instance, I wrote about an illness I had when I was traveling in Jordan, right? And it was, it was hard, but at the same time, I focused a lot on, I was there with a boyfriend, and we were in a hotel, and you're not supposed to have unmarried people in a hotel. And we got totally, we got caught on that, and, but you sort of lean into like, well, that's, that whole scene was pretty funny, even if my feeling not well isn't.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like having those moments of lightness, not only does it, just provide some variance for like the reader, it also can make those like darker moments hit harder. You know what I mean? It can give those some like extra, and I feel like that's especially the case in Lindsay's book, because a lot of it is so like light and like sweet and nice, that when those like the humor kind of drops out and it's a real moment, I really felt those moments. Could you talk a little bit about doing that, Lindsay?
Yeah, it's actually funny because when people have read it, they've been like, I really cried during your book. And I was like, when? I was actually really shocked by it. But yeah, I do. I think not actually that intentionally, looking back on it, like when I was trying to do the serious scenes was when I cut out the one-liners and I cut out the funny, like kind of movements that the characters were doing. And I think it gave it more of an impact. It was not intentional. I'm very happy that it worked out.
That's really interesting. So when in your first draft, you would say there were more like jokes and kind of one-liners in those beats? I
think so. I think I was always trying to put more jokes in because
sure.
I was really chasing that, like, I want a romantic comedy that's really comedic. But because I was doing that so much, when I was getting feedback from beta readers, they were like, how are these characters feeling? Like they're breaking up and she's like, oh, okay, well, like, good luck. It was sort of like, I actually had to revise that more in the second draft. So I think I had less sadness in the first and more jokes. I guess that is actually what you said to begin with.
Yeah. Just like doing, I relate to that because I feel like the same way, just because I think I'm a person who processes things through humor.
Yeah.
So when I'm writing like a first draft, even if the character is not necessarily somebody who does that, it's harder for me to resist the temptation to make the character like process things the same way that I would.
And I am the same. So I feel like I have to have it pointed out to me, like, this isn't really a joking time. Because I'm the same way. Like that like the jokes are easier for me. Like the part where like you have to
Yes.
really sit with the feelings. I'm always like, oh, like let's make a joke here.
Yes, I feel exactly the same way. Jennifer, what about you?
No, I get that, but one of the things that really surprised me with the first book is how the readers perceive it, because there were parts where I thought like were really funny and they didn't see that. Or there were other parts where I thought, they're like, oh, that was great. It was such a nice light moment. And, like that, there are two sort of competing men in my book. And I thought one of them was clearly like the person you don't like. And I was very surprising at every book club, people were, Team Willie or Team Abe. And I was like, really? Like that could be that part of me.
I had the same experience.
I love this.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's happening with you.
I was like, this isn't a love triangle. Like this was never that thing. Stop liking this other character. Like he's nobody.
Exactly. And but I think of that a lot when I'm writing humor too, because I'm like, who's going to get this, right? And that can be really challenging to want to put humor out. I had a piece, I can't remember which one it was on. Maybe it was Greener Pastures, but it was a writing topic. And for anyone who's Jewish, you have the high holidays. You have Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and there's this idea that your name is being written in the book of life. And so I did a whole thing on, God keeps missing deadlines because he's still, publishing God's book of life. And that's a very specific audience. So I was happy it got published, but I'm sure there were plenty of people who read it and were like, what's that about?
Sure.
And it's the same thing in a novel, except that you don't hear it as much because, when you publish online, people can write a comment like, what is this about?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something you think about, like what's going to land.
Yeah. I have found that with historical fiction, sometimes you're not writing to what history actually was, but what people's perceptions of history was, like I love to research and I love like delving into the, historical era that I'm writing in. And, sometimes my editor will come back and be like, I don't believe this. And I'm like, but it's something that actually happened in real life, but it's not believable. So it still like takes the reader out of the story. So you're still cutting it, even though you're not wrong.
Yeah, no, there's a name for that. I actually teach historical fiction.
There is?
And it's called the Tiffany problem, because Tiffany goes way back. But if some character is named Tiffany, readers think there were no Tiffany's back then. It's a no. If you look up the Tiffany problem, you will.
That's fascinating, because I really felt I was like, is anybody else like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
wow.
and I advise people sometimes, like even if it's a modern thing. I can't remember what the phrase was, but there's some phrase that Dickens used, but it sounds so modern that even if it's legit, you had to pull it out. Because otherwise, the reader will think you messed up.
That reminds me of this thing in humor writing, something I heard somebody else say, and I can't remember who it was, that like when you're naming a character in like a humor piece, what you want is like the name to just slide right by, like unnoticed, and that's similar to like historical fiction in a lot of ways. Like a lot of some of the details you just want to go unnoticed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's so cool. We only have like a few minutes left. So if anybody here has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Okay. Is there anything too far for inserting humor? What do you think about that?
Too far, like the joke is just too crazy, like you've gone too far, offending
I
people?
mean, I guess like yeah.
No, you go ahead.
No, I think that, actually Lindsay was saying this. There were points when she put in humor and people were saying, no, we need feelings here, right? So you do have to sort of rein it back. Even in a romantic comedy, like even in a comedy, there are periods where you have to be a little more somber. And, you can pretty much tell that. But I think in general, if it fits the scene, you can't go too far.
Yeah. And the character, it's just a character who would make a joke, in this moment because they are uncomfortable.
And also, I think my second book has, I think similar to what you were talking about, Jennifer, like just a lot of witty characters in it, but sort of understanding like the psychology of like not just what the joke is, but like why they're making that joke in the first place is helpful. That question was from Elaine, and she's now clarified she means medically inserted. So, do with that what you will. Here's a question from Mary. She wants to know, what were your early exposures to humor, like comedians, sitcoms, family members, things like that?
That's a good question. Now I'm going to blank on his name. And this is going to kill me. But when I was in high school, I started reading short humor pieces. Simon Rich, that's who it was. He came out. He came out with his first book. He was like just out of college, and he did like a short collection of, it was called Ant Farm. And I read that book and I was obsessed with it. And I was like, wrote him an email. I was like, hi, do you want to be friends? Because that's what you did back then. There was like no social media.
Right.
That like the way that he writes humor really stuck with me and was really funny. Now I have all his books.
For me, it's sort of like I can't even remember. I was very, very close with my grandfather. And so from an early age, it was Groucho Marx, it was Dorothy Parker. My family still quotes, some of the movies that we watched. And as I'm originally from Miami, Dave Barry and Carl Hyacin were just my heroes. And I read everything. So that's sort of my earliest.
And do you guys think that those like have an influence on your comedic writings today?
Simon Rich is a Jewish writer, and he made me realize that you could write about being Jewish and it could be really funny. And I think that has really influenced my writing. Like he will write, like some of his pieces are just like about being at the holidays or about like just being awkward at a bar mitzvah or just like those sort of things. And I think it gave me permission to be like, this is something that you can joke about and it's going to be accepted and people are going to think it's funny.
For me, I recently read a more recent book of Dave Barry's, and I was like, he's still funny. Like he can still just like get it out, and it inspires me that like you can keep it going for decades, and still be funny.
I do feel like Jennifer wrote a piece for Slackjaw about like it's called Rules for Sharing This Cafe with Me, a Writer. And I feel like I see a lot of Dave Barry in that piece. Now that you say that, I see that thread there. It's a very funny piece. Everyone go read it. Marilyn asks if we could comment on the balance between situational or slapsticky humor and humor that grows out of the characters and their real issues. I think both of you, I'm sure, have really fantastic things to say about this. But Lindsay in particular, I feel like your book had a lot of like both of these things, honestly, like kind of like situational humor and then also like some stuff that's a little more slapsticky. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Good.
I was just gonna say, how did you like balance those two things?
I think I tried to assign those different types of humor to different characters. So like there was like one character, and I did like really want to tap down. Like I made fun of like the male characters a little bit more, and I gave them more like the slapsticky, like sort of like making fun of them and not like laughing with them sort of jokes. And then like I gave like the women who I like wanted to like lift up a little more. I gave them more of like the funny commentary and gave them like the quirky, snarky one-liners more so than I gave the slapsticky stuff to the men more. Sorry guys.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jennifer, what do you have any thoughts on the balance between slapstick humor and character driven?
Yeah, so the one I'm working on right now actually spans prohibition from day to day, from start to end. And so my character grows. When we start out, she's a kid. And for her, the humor is more slapsticky. Like, her mother isn't, they're all immigrants and her mom has very old school ways. And she really wants a bob. And so she gets really angry at them and she does it herself in the middle of the night. And so the scene where the mother finds out, like that, it all comes up a little more slapsticky, but as she ages, it becomes more subtle, like less in your face.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that I think, like, because people are funny just in real life, humor can be such a good tool for making a novel just like come to life. Like, I feel like with both of your novels and both of your characters that you created, they both seemed like, all of these characters seemed so much more alive to me reading these books because of the humor that you both gave to these characters. I do have one more question just from myself. I hope we have time. Lindsay, I don't know if you're, I know you mentioned you're working on a second book. I know, like, a common thing in romance is like your second book will involve like characters from the first book. Is that true? Is that happening?
That is happening. Yes.
First of all, very just excited for that. Yeah. Second of all, because of your side characters carry a lot of the jokes, how are you like going from making them the main focus of the second book versus like more of the just comedic relief in the first book?
It is so hard, actually, because who was the comedic relief in the first book, Allie. The second book is her book, and it's like, how do you give her the arc? You know what I mean? When she's always the one coming up with the snarky one-liners, and so like everyone's like, oh, I'm so excited for her book, but I want to give her an emotional arc and I want to give her feelings, and so you want to make it authentic to her. But then you're like, well, now who's going to be funny? It's still her, but like.
But that's, maybe you can use like kind of what we were discussing earlier, like you're processing things through humor can also apply to that character. So that sounds great. Well, it's 1:30. That absolutely flew by. Thank you both so much for being here. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to, this is the Slackjaw newsletter I put together about this panel. It has links to both Jennifer and Lindsay's Medium pages. You can read some of their humor they've written. It has links to buy their books. It has links to buy my book, Last Night at the Hollywood Canteen, coming out November 7th. Lindsay, when does your book come out?
November 20th, 2024.
Okay, great. And
sorry, February 20th, 2024.
February 20th. Yeah.
February.
And Jennifer's book, Modern Girls, is out now. I highly recommend reading both of them. They're both fantastic. Thank you both so much for joining me. Thanks for everyone who came. Enjoy the rest of your Medium day. And thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much for having us.
I don't know how to end it.
You just leave?
I guess so.
You just
right. Well, I'm going to leave. Bye.
Bye.